Live? Okay. Sorry for the delay in the share. It's supposed to be last week. סימן Gimel didn't work out to give the share last week. We can give it this week. סימן Gimel talks about Kehuna. One of the aspects of Kehuna. Yeah. So Misha who suffered with Kehuna, that's סימן Gimel. Then in סימן Daled there's something which is relevant to Kehuna. And again, then later in סימן Vav, you have Din Nashim Asuras Kehuna. The bulk of the discussions in Poskim revolve around סימן Vav. But let's go through first on Bechlal. When it comes to Kohen, what is the questions that come up? Usually when a person wants to be recognized as a Kohen or to be recognized as not a Kohen, it usually comes up in a time of a chasana. But there are people who are Kohanim. How are they Kohanim? Because their father took them to shul and they did the duchening, so they're Kohanim. They remember that they were Kohanim. And those people, they're frum, their parents took them to shul, or they even not so frum, but they were connected to a shul and they were proud of their Kehuna, and they're recognized as Kohanim. Then there's another category of people that show up and tell you that they're Kohanim. Why are they Kohanim? They're not frum, they haven't duchened, there hasn't been a duchening in generations, maybe their Elter Zayda was a Kohen. They found on the matzeva of the Zayda the symbol of the hands. Now it's, in America you'll see it, in other places also, but matzevas for Kohanim sometimes have the symbol of the hand on it, two hands, the way that's done, Birkas Kohanim is done. That is a siman that the person was a Kohen, or at least that they thought he was a Kohen. Then there are people that remember that their grandparents told them that they were priests. There were some come from a priestly, that their ancestors worked in the Beis HaMikdash. You have some people like that also. Now they're not sure if they're Kohanim or Levim. It's cooler to be a Kohen, so they tell you they're Kohanim. Then you have people who their last names are Kohanim last name, just like a certain people have their last names are Levim last names. You know, those standard names that people think that are Kohanim. There are names which are known as Kohanim names. L'mashal Rappaport is a name which a lot of times is a Kehuna name. Katz, Cohen, obviously. Just like Segal and Levin are names that are usually connected to Levim. There are Cohens which are Goyim. There are Katzes which are Yisraelim. There are Levins which are Kohanim, and there are Levins which are not Levim either. They just took the name, picked up the name in America. But those are usually the people that come to you and be kind. When does a person come to you that this Kehuna question comes up? One of two options. Usually by the time of a shidduch, when you do Birur Yadus, you find out, you do one of the things you ask if a person is a Kohen. Why? Because you learn Nashim Asuras Kehuna, you're not allowed to marry a Grusha, you're not allowed to marry a Giyaris, you're not allowed to marry a Zayna, which is Nival La'asur Lai, La'asur Kehuna. So if a woman, or Chalala, which is harder to track down, and in such scenarios is when it comes up that you have to, the person, or when a person wants to marry a woman, gets, or Bas, you're going to see Bas Nochri, is a Peguma Kehuna, not the same, not as much as a Grusha and those ones. And those are the ones that come up usually. Now usually what are they trying to achieve? When they come to you, they want to marry the girl. So you're going to do research on the girl. You're going to find out, you have to do research. You have to do research, sign the girl, sign the boy. And the person, Bechlal, you do Birur Yadus. Now we went through in the previous Siman that there are shittas called mishpachas b'cheskas kashrus, and what exactly does it mean? Where does it mean? Do you have to research? According to some achreinim, only certain cases you have to research. Today we try researching everybody unless we have a very strong reason, people, families that have been in the Jewish communities for hundreds of years, you're not going to research, and they're being frum all the time, you don't have a reason to research, real reason to research. It's still good to research just in case, but still it's not so common, but usually you do this research. So you have to do research on both. You do research on the kohen, and do research on the girl. What research do you do on the kohen? So first let's do the research on the girl is more in the Geat to Siman Vav. You do research on the kohen. Why is that? Because this guy, let's say you find out that this guy is a kohen, and she's a psula, or she's not a psula, she was only with Yidden, whatever, so you're good to go, nothing to worry about. He's a kohen, he'll continue being a kohen, his kids are going to be a kohen, it's all good. What happens if she's a grusha, or she is a giyaris, or you have scenarios where a person becomes frum with he's married to a shiksa, and he becomes frum with his shiksa. And vayavay, he's a kohen. So now, what are you going to do? You're going to convert them. He's going to marry her. He's over an issur. So you're in a pickle. What are you going to do? So there is this movement that you should not be part of, which is a movement to make everybody ois koyanim. All these people make them ois koyanim. Why? Because you want to make people's life easy. Now, as a general rule, this is important, some of you are going to end up being rabbanim, hopefully all of you, that if someone comes and asks you a shaila, usually, if he knows what he's talking about, it's because he wants a solution. He wants a heter. Sometimes he wants to know if something is asur. I did have a shaila from a certain shliach recently about a certain geiris from a certain bezdin, and I explained to him on which scenarios you could rely. It's not really a recognized bezdin. Maybe if the guy is already an older guy, and he's not getting married, and v'chulu, and he's just a shaila of burying him in a Jewish cemetery, and he's frum, so you could rely on the bezdin. He's like, no, that's not the answer I was looking for. I wanted you to answer me that this bezdin, since it's not recognized, I shouldn't accept it because I have to make a policy. So I said, okay, you got your answer. This bezdin is not recognized, and you can make a policy. You could use my name, but we don't recognize the bezdin. Fine. Well, usually they want to get a heter. That doesn't mean that every time someone asks you a question, you have to give a heter. You could think about it. You could see. You got to look at the person, look at the situation. Don't forget to look at the Shulchan Aruch, and then you'll be able to see if it fits. But sometimes there is no solution. Sometimes you just have to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. So when you have this temptation to, this comes up if you're in shluchus and you have a person who's a big balabas, and you have to, he's a kohen, but he wants to marry a problematic woman. You have a temptation to make him ois kohen. So when you go through a little bit, it's not such a long share. First of all, when the person, the beginning of Siman Gimel, that if a person comes out of nowhere and says, I'm a kohen, you don't accept him. Why? Simple reason, he has a for truma not. Why? Because there's a financial benefit in being a kohen. You start collecting, getting extra fruits and vegetables, so you want to be a kohen. For Aliyah L'Torah, and for Birkas Kohanim, the Ramah holds that the Mechaber holds that you're not allowed, that it doesn't work. For the Ramah says you could do both Aliyah L'Torah and Nesias Kapayim, but Bepoil the Chelkas Mechoykik disagrees and says that Mela for Aliyah L'Torah, it's not such a problem because somebody else who's a kohen might be moichel him. But when it comes to duchening, it's over al asay, because asay is only kohenim are doing because kohenim koisav alchu to the kohenim. You're over an asay, so they shouldn't be schaylik on the Ramah. He's not fully on the side of the mechaber, but he's somewhere in the middle. So it boils down to a question of if you want to divide the shittas, if you go based on hanoah, financial hanoah, or other, or isurim, if it's a shaila of an isur. if it's a shaila that maybe this issue is going to cause it. Over here, it's not a financial hanoah that a person wants to become a kohen. Over here you have the opposite, not a financial hanoah, but a hanoah that the person does not want to be a kohen. So you start doing your research. So when you have such a scenario, you have to do the research. And you have to see if this person is a kohen. So you do your research, you see if the grandmother was a gioides, and she was mad, it means if his mother was a gioides, if his grandmother from his father's side was a gioides, then maybe she became, then Be'etzem, the son is no longer a kohen. And for this purpose. Or Bechlal, maybe he converted afterwards. Yeah, so when do you say, yeah?
Wouldn't something actually following up with, usually a guy coming when they went to college, and probably
we're not looking so now. So what do you do? Yeah, you have a situation. What do you do? So most of the tshuvas that are dealing with the Kehuna aspect, the Cheskas Kehuna B'zman Hazeh, are usually because they had scenarios where the woman was a problematic woman, and you didn't know what to do with them. So you figured out a way to make them ois kohen. There are cases of people, specifically from certain places in the world, that they find chicks and they want to convert them and want to marry them, and suddenly they want to become ois kohen, and they try to convince you the grandmother was married to, was living with a guy, she learned in college, or so yeah, fine. Like you asked about learning in college, right? So there is such a truth. Learning in college makes a person becheskas that she's.
And actually do the research and ask the mother.
Right. So now sometimes, yeah, my grandmother learned in university. Yeah, you could tell. Personally, my grandmother learned in university. Oh, which university did she learn in? Oh, she learned in Brooklyn College. Oh, okay, so she went home every night. She wasn't in the dorm. You already start losing the chazaka. You could ask her, if a person says Lakosha Nivalti, she's Nemanis. Yeah, you're going to see that later. So you do this research. Now, I'm just going to go through some of the interesting tshuvas that came up. I'm not going to go through so much of the details because these things, just the cases that came up in the last 50, 60 years, some of them are actually interesting, also the questions. And you see how it was approached. One is from a tshuva, it's a tshuva from the Moshe Feinstein. The shaila was from Rav Baruch Leizerovsky, was the Av Bezdin was a Dayan Av Bezdin in Philadelphia. And this is a tshuva, and she has a tshuva's Tam Baruch, Chelik Aleph, Siman Ayin. And he says, a person became, says, B'inyan Ploini ben Ploini, Shenaise Bal Tshuva B'hashpoas Chavrei Chabad. ואויד, שכיום הוא שם תורה מצוות ככל חרדי רגל. אמנם דאקה שהוא כהן, ונוסו גיורס שנסגר על ידי רבי קונסרבטיבי, ועכשיו הוא בא לפון לבקש היתר להישאר עימה. He wants to stay married to this woman. And he says the story. He says his family emigrated from Russia, from a city called Zlatopola in Ukraine. Sorry, not Russia. I got mixed up. It's easy to get mixed up in today's day and age. In 1923, yeah, and you see how he writes. Bishnas 1923, Higro le Cuba, Mirussia, Meir Zlatopola shebo Ukraina. So he also got mixed up. And from Russia, from the city Zlatopola in Ukraine. And his father was also not Shemer Torah Mitzvahs. And he Bechlal didn't educate him, Bechlal anything Torah Mitzvahs. Bechlal doesn't know, the father doesn't know anything about it. And the Tavshin Chav Beis, they came to America. And afterwards, this guy came and met a Jewish woman, and she converted by conservatives. And Kavur Zman Hushpu Shnei Mecheves Chabad Vot Chugim Charedim.
She was Jewish?
She's a guy. She was a guy.
He met a guy.
This Kohen, this young Kohen, met a guy. When he's Davagima. And then she converted by the conservatives. Then he met Chabad Hushpu Shnei Mecheves Chabad Vot Chugim Charedim. And until today, the Shem Shabbos, kosher. And she even goes to mikveh, and now he discovered that he's a kohen, he's not allowed to. And he says he went through different tshuvas, And the people that he found the tshuvas which are not matir, avot tzrichim lotzis yidei abriya is gamkein, shelo yoimru sha'arabonim einam merachmim ve'einam margishim betzarom shel Yisrael. You got to be, at least make them feel that you care about their pain. So therefore he's asking Reb Moshe for a tshuva what to do about a scenario. So Reb Moshe goes and he answers, the tshuva is also printed over there. Well, 1923, when they moved from Ukraine, they didn't have any knowledge in Judaism. His father, that means his Kohen's father, who didn't know anything about Judaism, they're already 5 years into communism in 1923. And now, the father of this boy, who's now married to this Giyaris, the father, because he didn't educate his kids in any form of Torah mitzvahs, he's not ein lo shum ne'emanus le'emar shu kohen. He says, especially since this boy, this kohen, didn't hear directly from his grandfather that he's a kohen. He says, Meila, if he would hear from his grandfather, do we know from
the Shaila how he discovered he's a kohen?
It doesn't say how he discovered that he's a kohen. It says that, it doesn't say. He just found out that he's asked to be with he thought he was a kohen. So he says he didn't hear from his grandfather. His grandfather maybe learned in Cheder. So maybe if you would tell him, there'll be a question. But over here, it's already not the grandfather telling him. It's the father telling him that you're a kohen. It says, I have no nemanus. He says, why Reb Moshe says? He says, his lashon, b'shvil chashash shebo me'anoshim reshoim she'eino ne'monim klal ein le'osram kol zman she'eino l'diyo me'ish kosher. Because here, what are we talking about? He says, until you don't have proof from an ish kosher that these people are kehanim, and the whole knowledge is based on his father. His father is completely frei. His grandfather didn't tell him anything. Maybe he didn't see his grandfather. He only hears from his father. So you can't rely on that. That means if we're talking, just listen to the diuk over here. It says the only knowledge you have this person is a kohen comes from a person who didn't educate his kids in any form of Judaism. So therefore, he is not trusted to tell his kid, you're a kohen. If there will be a yediyah mi'ish kosher, then you have a shayla. So then he continues. He says, lochush lechatchila. Maybe lochush lechatchila. He doesn't even have to. Ki misubkani tuva ki hu lehoitzi meruba deruba de'enam kohenim. To make what you want to do now, you have a ruba deruba of Bnei Yisrael are not kohenim, and now you want to take him out of that roiv and to make him into a kohen. So he says that's not. Therefore, do a giur kedin, and be megayer the daughter because already you had a child. V'yisrael achar kach bechupa v'kedushin kedin. Converter. Let her get married, and all fine. And also similar shilas. It seems similar to all similar shilas that came up on such a scenario. That is what the Moshe answered in Tafshin Lamed Hein. What's interesting? It's not really connected. This Rabbi Lezerovsky didn't ask if they have to get converted or not. He just said, "What's the din to him to live with this woman, to marry this woman?" Moshe points out, go convert them. The Gatus is worthless. It's conservative Gatus. The Gatus is worthless. Go convert them. Go convert them properly. Otherwise it's not. Otherwise it's nothing. Similar thing you have with Reb Moshe is a bunch of tshuvas. Reb Moshe writes it in his Igros Moshe. And the same kav is going to be in all places. What's interesting is to focus on the shilas, because to understand what the questions were, and based on that, the answers might be the same. This person is not a kohen. But when you look at the questions, then you understand what kind of questions are the ones that come up of certain scenarios. This is in Even HaEzer Chelik Dalet Siman Yud Aleph. A person who was machzik himself to be a kohen. What was his whole knowledge of being a kohen? Be'ez shekoru oisei l'simchas habar mitzvah Amar Shu Kohen. His father, when he got his bar mitzvah aliyah, his father told him, okay, you're a Kohen, take Kohen aliyah. But his father is not Shemer Torah mitzvahs bichlal. And the father, Borach mi beis aviv beyaldusei mitzad merdoi be'aviv. Shelafi adas lo'yhoi leida kol kach dover kazeh. Shelochin ein lo shum ne'emanus lezeh shehu kohen. He says he rebelled against his father. He can't really rely on his knowledge that he is a kohen. Additionally, there's an aunt, a cousin that said, you're not really a kohen. You say you're a kohen, not really a kohen, because your Zayda's brother wasn't a kohen. So how could you say to be a kohen? And therefore, the Moshe passing over there, you don't have to worry about that he's a kohen. And even midin shavi anafshe, you don't have to worry about it. Midin shavi anafshe is that you determine to yourself are a kohen. It says in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch and Siman Gimel that if you're going to do shavi anafshe, at least for yourself, you oyster yourself for marrying this woman. He says that's not even enough to do shavi anafshe. Why? Because his whole reliance on him being a kohen is based on his father is telling him that he's a kohen, and his father has no ne'emanis. Why? Because his father was not frum, and therefore einu tzorech legarash esishtei hagiyoris, she giyoris betzedek uzehiru bechol dinei haTorah, verashay lichius imok makol Yisrael begiyoris ki einenu kohen. That's one. The next tshuva in the same volume, another interesting story. A person comes from a Reform family. Siman Yud Beis, and Evan has a chelik dal.
He's saying that he's remembering something from his childhood, that he's a kohen.
Yeah.
How come we're doing research beyond that point? Don't we say that if he says, if he remembers, I remember when I was a kid, there was something, a mice that happened that shows that I'm a kohen.
Yeah, but that's what kind of mice that he ate truma.
So it has to specifically...
That he was duchening, he did something which is a kohen. Not that at the day of his bar mitzvah, he, and what the Moshe is saying is, if the father is fry, then the fact that he told you when you were a kid that you're a kohen means nothing.
Right, but why are we looking at the father? The guy is saying, he has the zikaron when he was a kid.
He has a zikaron that his father told him at the bar mitzvah, you're a kohen. Shkoyach doesn't help you anything. He has a zikaron that his father told him when he's a kid that he's a kohen. That's not what it refers to. The zikaron that we're talking about over here is when a person remembers when he was a kid, he was taken under the talus to do duchening. Not under the talus of his father listening to duchening, the talus of his father in the duchen place. So that is that. His father is frum, or at least understood kehuna, was a member in a shul, did duchening on a regular basis. Not that one time I had an aliyah in my life, my father told me I'm a kohen. The other one is another one. The next case is also a person that's reform. Comes from a reform family, that his parents weren't keeping any Torah mitzvahs, and the son became frum, Baal Tshuva, and he considered himself a kohen. Why was he machzik himself to be a kohen? Because his grandfather davened in a shul in Germany where they considered him a kohen. And on the matzeva of a zayde, osu tzir yodayim, shu סימן shahaya kohen v'nasa kapav. Because they made a drawing of the hands on the matzeva. And he even has a picture. It's picture shel fotografia, ma matzeva. And now he wants to marry a giyoris. And being that his father still acts like a kohen, so all his siblings are making a mecha against him. But now he says, being that his father himself is completely fry, and his mother is also fry, nice a sofek. We have a sofek. The ulai zin so'ima yim nochrim apsulim the kehuna kaidim shanisis loy. Maybe we have a sofek. Maybe the mother, since she reformed, not from, maybe she was mezaneh with goyim. And therefore, he's a chalo. And also, and here comes a shalom bias problems. So the wife of this guy said, I heard from my shviger, she couldn't shnis lebel, zinsim harbe anoshim, v'le chashish al zeh. V'gam baila l'chashish al zeh, b'asher gam hu haya noyef. וגם אחר אחס נזינם אחרס, והיה לו גם בן מאחס. וניקנס חמויס אצל הבסדין, וביקשו יש שספר לו כל הקרס האויסם ממנו יורהו, ובתי הספר שביקרו, ולחברים שהיו לו. Yeah, we asked her, well, this is what kind of research they did. They did the research and they found out that she has goyish friends. ואם נוחרי אחד ששמוי היה פריץ, היה לו יחסים מאוד אינטימיים, וניבו לו פעם אחס. And she said that all her parents and by them and that family, they didn't care. You marry a Yid, you marry a Goy, they're reformed, they couldn't care less. So it was clear to the Bezdin that there's no issue over here. Yeah, that was and they still asked Moshe what to do about it. So the question is, could you rely on such a thing? Yeah. So the shaila was, could you trust this woman now to passel her kids? The mother of the kohen. The kohen is married to Geoides, wants to know if he should passel now, if he's allowed to marry Isha, which is Asurali. So Reb Moshe actually picked up the phone, Dibarti b'telephone, so he picked up the phone to the guy to find out, because this Bezdin didn't want to make him Ois Kohen. Why? His father holds himself as a Kohen, his uncle holds himself as a Kohen, his brothers consider themselves Kehanim. So what are you going to do now? You're going to make them, it's where you have to be careful with this. You're going to decide that one guy is not a Kohen. You can't have two brothers coming from the same father and the same mother. One is a Kohen and one is not. Why? Because one married a Besula, one married a Geoides. So suddenly one becomes a Kohen because you wanted to make him a Kohen to allow him to marry Geoides. It doesn't work like that. But in this scenario, so the question was, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to deal with it? So he called. What was the question that he did, that Moshe asked? He didn't ask the son, who was your mother with? Because she already told the Bezdin that she was with Goyim and everything. He asked the son, because the son did duchening. He became frum. Did duchening. Nice about Shuvah, Chzikatzim Kehuna, Nikra Torah Rishon, Neise Kapov. And he asked the son one question. Could we worry that maybe your mother is lying? That your mother is lying. He didn't ask what the mother did. Because he already heard, the Bezdin already chayker. The mother came to Bezdin and said, yeah, I was with Goyim. So whoever was here last year knows the story about Rav Bar Shalom said the story about the guy who dragged his mother to try and convince the rabbi that she slept with a guy so he could marry, and then the mother, when he kicked the son out of the car, the mother admitted that it was all bluff, the son just tried to pull a fast one on the rabbi. And that's why she was saying it. But over here he's asked, is it shaykh that your mother's lying? The son said no. He knows his mother, even though, on these things, she's not la'olam ena meshakeres, v'chol dvoreho emes. That's what the son said. I never heard from my mother that she lied. Everything she said, for my whole life, she always said the truth. So therefore he says, that Moshe Paskins nifsahu mikehuna, tzarich lahafsik melisa kapov, v'lo yikro yisel terev mokim koyen ki hu cholol, uvnoi rasha elisa nashim psulas kehuna ki hu cholol. V'lochin rasha elisa giyeris mizgar kedim v'shemeres Torah. Why over here again? The situation again, over here you have more than one element. You never rely on one element. You never say, let's make them puzzle just because the father is frei. You never say, let's make this guy kohen puzzle. You have to look. Sometimes you have that the father, if your whole knowledge of kehuna is because of a father who was not frum, then you can't. It's not enough to make a difference. If your whole knowledge of kehuna is more than that, you know that your grandfather was a kohen, but now you have that the here that the mother was with a guy, then you have a reason to do it. If the grandfather was known to be a kohen and the father is frei, it's not enough to make the kid ois kohen and say, oh, well, Moshe Paskins and the tshuva, that if you heard from your father that you're a kohen, automatically you're not a kohen. That's not how it works. Each situation for itself. Now, by the way, in the tshuvas usually, the books of tshuvas usually, they print, most of the time they print the cases which they solve the problems, not the cases that they don't. So you have to take into consideration there's an equal amount as other tshuvas where they tried. They didn't write a tshuva. If you tell a guy he's a kohen, you don't have to write a tshuva why he's a kohen. You just leave him as chazakah. So there's going to be a disproportionate amount of tshuvas. If you're going to look, you're going to think, oh, every rabbi that ever had a case of a kohen made him ois kohen. It's not so. Just what's printed, because that you have to write a tshuva on. to tell a guy, you duchen until now, continue duchen, you don't have to write a tshuva. And you can't marry this woman. So this we went through, hearing from your grandfather to your kohen, from your father to your kohen, hearing from somebody who was frei, and hands on the matzeva, which is a raya, because the fact is that without the mother saying that she was with goyim and she grew up in a house where we couldn't care about marrying goyim, the hands of the matzeva would have been a raya that the zayda was definitely a kohen. So now let's move to last names. This is a tshuva from the Shevet HaLevi, Chelik Tes, Siman Reish Nun Gimel. The question was about tshuva echad sheshmoi kohen midoros. Right, Savoi Nasa Isha Nachria, Eviyoldo Lo Shnei Banim, Echad Abanim Ala Arza V'Nasa Bas Yisrael, V'Lo Siper Koyres Chai V'Zug Hazeh, Noilad Ben Abal Tshuva Shelefaneinu. Yeah, what was the shaila? The story was that the Zayda, we know his last name is Kohen. His grandfather, the way the story goes, married a shiksa. And then the father, whose name is Cohen, is really a guy. The mother is Jewish. This boy's mother is Jewish. And the question is, now if the father, whose name is Cohen, is he a guy? Because the story is that the grandmother, that the father says, my mother was not Jewish. My father was Jewish. The Baba was a guy. Is it enough or not? Because now we know for sure he's a Yid. We know for sure his last name is Cohen. We know for sure his grandfather's name is Cohen. We know for sure his grandfather's name is Cohen. We know for sure that he's a Yid because his mother is Jewish. And he wanted to know if he has to be choishish before he marries somebody, what to look out for. So the Shevet HaLevi first goes into a whole different discussion. Cheskas Kehuna, he says, V'ashiv b'kitzur kedarki b'dvarim shorshim. First I want to go to the root of the problem. I'm not going to discuss the specifics. There's a whole machlokes about Kehanim, if the Kehanim b'zman hazeh, if they have a chazakah, or not. There's a whole machlokes. There are certain that say that they are Kehanim based on the Chazakah, and then you have the Marashdam and the Shus Yaakov that they hold that all Kehanim today are Kehanim Sofik. And they don't really have a Chazakah. And because the majority of them, probably majority of them got mixed up throughout the generations, we don't really know what happened with them. And even the Beis Ephraim, because the Beis Ephraim, which takes even a further approach, that says that Kehanei HaHamoin, the regular Kehanim, they don't know B'chlal their Yichus and whatever, and they think that by just saying we're Kehanim, we purchased, we acquired the status of Kehuna, and they don't really have a strong raya. So the Shevet goes further and says, and all these shittas that we're discussing from the Poskim before are talking about in the time when the majority of Yidden kept Torah mitzvahs. And still we said that they're not reliable. That the majority of Kehanim have a shvacha yichus. How much more so today's day and age? The Shuvah was written in Tafshin Nun Daled, that you have people coming from Russia, a bunch of generations, they don't have any yichus, they have no idea what it is. They're mixed with goyim and everything else. We only have a minority of the original of Jews that we know for sure they're Jews. The rest of them are mixed with goyim and everything else. So now you're going to come and you want to tell me that in today's day and age, people are Kehanei Chazakah, are strong enough of a kohen to be able to make that the person should become a kohen that is not allowed to marry all these things. So he says, even though the Shulchan, so he says, no, we can't rely on that. And even though Shulchan Aruch in the first sif in Siman Gimel says that when a person says Kohen Ani, maybe you're going to mechaber, you don't even give him an aliyah. According to the Ramah, you do give him an aliyah, but regardless, he is Shavya Nafshei, Chaticha de Yisur, and he can't marry a woman. He says that doesn't apply. Misha Bomim Mirchoikim, someone who came, Shekvar Doires Harbe Oz V'Moker Machtzavtom. And he says they already lost the all they're not frum for generations. And now you have that the father says that the grandmother was a shiksa. So what? So he's not being poisel kahuna. What he's doing is he's saying, I'm a guy. So he's saying, I'm a guy. So obviously the fact that he has a last name that is Cohen is not enough to do anything. We believe him that he's a guy. His son is kosher, but he's a yid. The mother's for sure Jewish. His son is kosher. He's a guy with a Jewish last name, and you don't have to consider him a kohen. Umada nikra shema mishpacha kohen loimaylu moirid b'zeh tichziku b'shem avalei b'yichus. It's all. It's not nothing about the fact that you have a last name. It's not enough to make a difference in such a scenario. When you have again over here. It wasn't just, again, you see over here, he didn't just rely on the fact that the grandparents, that they were not frum. That was a big part of it, to take away the ne'emanus of you claiming that you were kohen. But just on that, it's not enough. The only ones that Moshe, the Tam Baruch over there, he says that because he went fry and that he didn't hear directly from his grandfather, over there he did rely on it. All other cases we see it's not. It's been nice to something else. Oh, this fry says no ne'emanus. There is a grandmother, she was probably a guy. The other one, she was living with somebody.
Why you need to go so far? I mean, according to those shittas, anyways, a suffix, you have a suffix,
If what? To make a person a suffix?
According to the way he was describing the relationship, the language.
Yeah, they're all sfeikis, so that means that when you have another reason to be mekel, you can be mekel. But not that we take now every kohen that wants this goes to duchen and he wants to marry somebody. And his father went to duchen, his grandfather was duchening, his great grandfather was duchening, and we don't have any reason to believe that there was any playing around, or there was any grushas goyus or whatever in the family tree. To say, well, the Marashdam says kehani chazaka b'meila, marry whoever you want. You're not abolishing kahuna because we're just making us. There's a suffix. No, there's a suffix. So therefore, when we use it as a sniff. We use it as a sniff together with other things. We also do this one. So you have kehani chazaka. B'meila, when you have a reason that the person says the grandmother was married, the grandmother was a goy, maybe she's buried in the goyish cemetery. That the mother grew up in a reform house that didn't care about the Jewish things. So we don't use a standard siman. A person says his last name is Cohen, it's not enough to do it. Person is oila l'duchen, but his mother says that she lived with a guy, it's not enough. And even though over there we do trust her. You realize we don't trust him to say that he's a kohen, but we do trust the mother that she lived with a guy. We don't trust the father to say that he's a kohen, because if he's Jewish, he's frei, and if he's not Jewish, but we do trust him. His grandmother was a guy to make him a guy. So we don't trust to be ma'ila the kahuna based on that. Certain things. If it's bitter amitzius, we could rely on it. Now there is a one more that I wanted to mention.
A woman can't say her son is a mamzer. No.
Because she's posed in love with Bakal. She's not posed in love with Bakal.
She's not one.
Huh?
She's not one to say
That he's not a kohen?
Yeah.
It's not posel. Yeah, it's different than a mamzer. A mamzer is a much bigger psul. You have a person, and then the last one, I'm going to finish another Shevet HaLevi also, Chelik Yutzim Reish Chafei, that you have a Mishpachas Baal Tshuva, Sheyesh Chashash Mevusas Shabal Ulai Kohen. And she, the wife of this Baal Tshuva, was married to a guy before. So the shaila is, first of all, does he have to divorce her? Because she's asura to him. Second of all, are the kids chalolim or not? Now, if the kids are chalolim, it's a problem, because if the guy's really a kohen and his wife is a grusha and the kids are chalolim, then even the daughter can't marry a kohen. If he's not really a kohen and his wife is a grusha, then the daughter is just a regular Yisrael and she could marry a kohen. So making a person a chalal makes it much worse. So if you're able to figure out b'chal not kohenim, you're much better off. And he went through it. He says he's there was a shaila, and he says he's masking to the svara, and he says when a person himself has no idea anything about him. He doesn't know anything about Torah mitzvahs. And what's the raya? Is his father was not frum, so he also didn't do anything of kahuna. The son of Matzeva is a Kohen family, probably the same thing. This is no, he says, Ein kan chazaka, ein kan edus. This is not a chazaka, this is not a edus. It's written in the Mabit. And unless you receive an edus that is good, that the guy is a Kohen, you can't consider him a Kohen. So he says, La'inyan etzem ha'kehuna, you want to talk about all these kinds of people, sha'anoshim ka'elu. So even if you want to say that they came from Mishpachas Kehanim, which is possible, we still goes back to the same, what we said, the machlekes ha'kadmoinim, if Kehuna bisman hazeh is a chazaka gemura or it's a sofik. The Marashdam and the Shvus Yaakov and all of them all held that they're only sofik. And he says so. And the Krakosafti Be'ashambait Mekaymes, he says, I already wrote that in our generation in Eretz Yisrael, the majority of the Kehanim come from Chutz La'aretz, and therefore you can't even use the Svara, because in Yuchsin there are certain times that we said that people in Eretz Yisrael, there are some people that rely on Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to check Yichus. In Eretz Yisrael, a person's a Kohen is less of a problem. He says, no, today majority of Kehanim in Eretz Yisrael came from Chutz La'aretz. And in Chutz La'aretz there was Gzeiris and everything else, and everyone got mixed up, and we don't know who and what. Kamuvan ein ze siba chas v'shalom lahokir rosh b'dina kihuna. Kamuvan. Ma da huchziku bein l'schus bein l'chiyu v'isur. If they have a proper chazaka, it's fine. But this is for general kohanim. But if they came from a family which for generations they lived without Torah mitzvahs, and they were, he says, and especially these ones that lived in Freie Kibbutzim, they were Poirei Koil all Torah mitzvahs. They had no problem with Arayas, with Isur Eshesish B'li Agbola. Even if there was issues like the Chuppah v'Kiddushin, they were Efkiru Neshisei Midah Zel al Zeh B'yoidin and B'lo yoidin. And that is such a situation. This person comes from such a scenario, and especially if you're talking about Kehani Russia, Chiloinim Gemuri Midairis, that Kimat ain't suffering, they're for sure Chalalim. So therefore, he sees it Dvarim Noitim. There's no real reason that this guy who is the Baal Tshuva, who thinks that he's going to be that there's a Shaila of a Kehuna, should have to worry about it. He doesn't have to separate from his wife. So that is essentially the ideas over here. A person comes, it can't be meiko. You can't say, oh, this guy's not a kohen, this guy is to try and do it. It's when there's a chazaka that the person is taka kohen, when his father duchen, zayd duchent, and there's a reason to believe that they're kehanim. But if a person did not duchen, the person is completely not frum, didn't teach anything about kehuna, then it's not, and they didn't know about kehuna, then is when you start looking to see if you could to make them ois kohenim. But obviously, ein lahokil rosh chas v'shalom, like the Shevet HaLevi says, to go and take a person and say, I have to make his life easy, so I'm going to make him ois kohen. And if anybody does do it, there are certain rabbinical bodies which engage in such things for a price. And the lav dafka that their piskadim are worth anything for that specific reason. Everybody knows Sikha from the Rebbe about when there was the Heter Mamzeirim in Eretz Yisrael in the Lameds, Tavshnamet Gimel, and it's called the Ach V'Achot, the Pasha V'Shlomo Goren. And one of the things over there, one of the biggest issues was that the person who paskin to make the Heter is because he received a benefit out of it. Because he received a big benefit out of it, he became the chief rabbi. So he was negei b'davar to make the person ois mamzer. So if a person is going to make somebody ois kohen for the purpose of that, and the top of the law, if he charges you for it, so you have double reason not to rely on him.